Let's just jump right in. You've probably seen the news about all the military maneuvers and the totally confusing geopolitical gridlock in the Middle East between the US, Israel, and Iran. But today, in this explainer, we're zooming in on what that actually means for you. Because ultimately, this standoff isn't just happening oceans away. It's happening right there in your wallet, every single time you hit the gas pump.
Okay, take a look at this number. $101. That's not just some random market blip. That is the price a barrel of Brent crude oil recently hit, and it is the immediate, painful result of a stalled foreign policy. As Professor Jeffrey Sachs lays out in his analysis, this is the direct consequence of a massive, manufactured bottleneck in our global energy supply.
And here's where it really hits home. According to Sachs's breakdown, the world is literally reeling from a devastating energy crisis right now. It's everyday citizens globally who are footing the bill. We're talking surging gas pump prices, stubbornly high inflation that just won't quit, and mounting economic pressure worldwide. And the longer the standoff drags out, the closer we edge toward a real trajectory of economic disaster. So you're probably asking yourself, why exactly is a broken ceasefire halfway across the world draining your bank account? Well, to understand why you're suddenly paying way more just to commute to work or grab groceries, Sachs argues that we really need to untangle the incredibly messy series of events that actually led to the current U.S. blockade of Iranian ports. Let's break it down.
Let's walk through the timeline here, because it's kind of wild. 2 weeks ago, a ceasefire was supposed to be a done deal, but then Israel attacks Beirut. Instantly, in response, Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz, which, if you don't know, is an absolute choke point for global oil. The U.S. then slaps a blockade on Iranian ports. Shortly after that, the attacks actually stopped and Iran briefly reopened the strait. But here is the critical complication according to Sachs. Despite everyone de-escalating, the U.S. inexplicably kept its blockade in place. It just completely fractured an already fragile situation.
Which brings us to right now. President Trump indefinitely extended the ceasefire, sure, but he kept that blockade active. Sachs assesses that this is basically a strategy to pressure Iran into begging for a deal, but that's not exactly working out. The spokesman for the Iranian parliament outright dismissed it, flat out saying the extension of the ceasefire has no meaning under these conditions. Basically, they're not sitting by the phone waiting to surrender. So, the crucial point is that we are at a total deadlock. The U.S. says the ceasefire is indefinite but keeps the economic chokehold. Iran flat out refuses to negotiate while that blockade is active, and because neither side is budging an inch, the Strait of Hormuz remains entirely choked off again. And that right there is the exact mechanism accelerating this global energy squeeze you're feeling.
Now, you might be wondering, how on earth did the U.S. and Israel end up in this massive gridlock to begin with? I mean, causing a global energy crisis wasn't the master plan, right? Well, according to Sachs, this entire mess comes down to a colossal initial miscalculation about how this conflict would actually play out. Sachs is pretty blunt here. He asserts the whole operation was built on what he calls a massive delusion, this idea of a quick, one-day strike. The premise was that a fast attack would wipe out Iranian leadership, and then boom, the U.S. and Israel would just easily control the region. He notes this was actually modeled on the U.S. playbook for Venezuela, operating under the assumption that if you just apply intense pressure, the government will simply fold and hand over control.
In his analysis, Sachs forcefully argues that the U.S. was basically sold a piece-of-cake war by Israeli leadership. He actually goes as far as calling Prime Minister Netanyahu a conman to a conman for convincing the U.S. this would be some easy overthrow. But Sachs emphasizes a really critical reality check here. Israel absolutely cannot sustain this fight alone. They literally require minute-by-minute U.S. support when it comes to arms, anti-missile defenses, and satellite intelligence.
So, when we look at who can actually outlast the other in this economic blockade, Sachs compares their core motivations, and it's a stark contrast. He describes the U.S. side as a war of whim, totally driven by political strategy and delusion. But for Iran, he defines it as an existential threat. They are quite literally fighting for their survival as a political entity. Because of that massive difference, Sachs concludes Iran has a much, much higher pain threshold in this standoff.
And meanwhile, time is definitely not on the United States side right now. President Trump is facing 3 massive impending deadlines that make this current economic squeeze politically toxic for him. The political pressure clock is ticking loud. Think about it. In just a few weeks, there's a highly scrutinized state visit to China. Then in June, the U.S. is hosting the World Cup, the ultimate global showcase. And then the big one, the November midterms. With public approval ratings already taking a nosedive precisely because of high inflation and skyrocketing gas prices, Sachs argues these looming events will absolutely force the administration to face the failure of their current strategy. You just can't walk into midterms carrying a self-inflicted energy crisis. So how do we get out of this? Sachs is absolutely adamant that the only way to lower oil prices and actually stop this energy crisis is for the U.S. to admit the strategy failed and end the standoff. Continuing to double down on this disaster is only going to crush the global economy further. Now, a lot of physical infrastructure was destroyed, so prices won't magically drop to normal overnight. But ending the blockade is the absolute only way to stop digging the hole deeper and finally bring some relief to citizens. He actually lays out a super straightforward, tactical fix. Step 1, the United States lifts the blockade on Iranian ports. Step 2, in return, Iran reopens the Strait of Hormuz, letting global oil flow freely again. And Step 3, both sides actually sit down and negotiate based on Iran's 10-point plan. The whole goal is to get back to the negotiating table instead of dropping bombs.
Now, looking at the big picture, what are the broader lessons here? Sachs is incredibly careful to warn against glorifying this conflict. The toll has been horrific. We're talking thousands killed, universities bombed, critical infrastructure completely ruined in Iran. But the strategic takeaway is impossible to ignore. Iran successfully demonstrated formidable resilience and real deterrent power. They proved they actually have leverage, and according to this analysis, they just won't be scared away by threats. Furthermore, this conflict really exposed some glaring vulnerabilities in broader Gulf security. Nations like Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia are waking up to the fact that having U.S. military bases on their soil didn't exactly protect them. In fact, Sachs notes these bases are increasingly viewed as magnets for trouble. This is sparking a permanent shift. Gulf nations are actively rethinking their alliances now that the old model, relying solely on a U.S. security shield, has totally failed a major stress test. Ultimately, Sachs wraps up his analysis by concluding that this entire crisis serves as a very painful lesson on the absolute limits of American unilateral power. He views the idea that America can just call the shots for the rest of the world as wrong-headed, delusional, and dangerous. America is absolutely a superpower, but it is not all-powerful. It can't just dictate terms to regions that refuse to be dictated to. And trying to force that, he argues, is exactly what triggered this massive global economic fallout in the first place. So as you feel the pinch of this shifting world order in your own wallet the next time you're filling up your car, we want to leave you with this question to ponder. If unilateral superpower influence has truly reached its limits, what does the new global balance of power actually look like? How is the globe going to adapt when one nation can no longer just dictate terms to everybody else? Thanks for exploring this explainer with us. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll catch you next time.